Hello everybody. Welcome to the ninth and final lecture of our book talk series, Spatial Practices in Chinese Art History and Visual Studies, organized by the Department of Chinese Culture of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. This book talk is co-organized by myself, Kathy Mack, Assistant Professor of Art History, and also my colleague, Dr. Pan Lu, Associate Professor specializing in Cultural Studies, both of us from the Chinese Culture Department of PolyU. And Lu herself is joining us as an audience today. This book talk series consists of the fall and spring seasons, now being extended to the summer. Over the past year, Lu and I have invited 8 scholars specializing in different Chinese historical periods, from Ming Dynasty all the way to the present, to discuss notions of space, landscape, monument, geography, cartography, and travel explored in the speaker's recent books. Today, we're very glad and proud to conclude this year-long program by introducing an art curatorial perspective, since we have invited Dr. Anthony Leung Po-shan, she goes by Leung Po here, an independent researcher and curator based in Hong Kong, to share with us a public art project titled Lamma Mia that she co-curated for and on an island called Lamma Island in Hong Kong from early 2021 to early 2022. Coming along with this curatorial project was the publication of a thick booklet under the same title by the Hong Kong government-run Leisure and Cultural Services Department. We call it LCSD here. The book is now available online and at local art bookstores. Okay, so let's welcome Leung Po. Leung Po, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Hello, would you like to say hi?
Yes, I hope because it's a Iceland state of being that we have to cope with the weather, and tonight the typhoon is getting close to us now. I hope my internet will keep stable tonight.
Right. One thing to emphasize here is that Leung Po is a resident of Lamma Island, so the internet connection there may be affected by the typhoon. So first of all, maybe we can invite you to share with us some of the background information about this curatorial project.
And it's this, the project actually is a long journey for me, because it first started with a smaller project that only research on the village that I have been living for 20 years. But then it finally come to a point that I'm searching for a new perspective to interpret the findings. And then I find there is a thing called island studies. And then I keep on expanding the scope to include the southern sections of the Lamma Island, and then also expand it in different practice apart from just research, oral history, cultural landscape, that kind of writing. We resulted as a curatorial project that is a research-led on-site project on Lamma Island, and is a project presented by the LCSD and also organized by the Art Together, and it includes 15 set of artwork, site-specific artwork, and they have kind of certain interesting characteristic. Maybe we can keep on looping some of the images so that our audience can have a glimpse of what's going on.
Right, because I think Leung Po has prepared a few slides showing us some of the curatorial or artistic strategies that artists use in this curatorial project. So yeah, please tell us.
Yeah, so there of course the relationship between the curator researcher and with the artist is not instructive. It's just we are setting an approach. I will not say it's a context, because we are encouraging artists to join our research as well. So we are kind of like a biological relationship with the artists, and the artists are very clever and immediately pick up the spirit of the project that is trying to introduce the cultural landscape of the island. So some of the works are indexical instead of merely representational or iconic. So they are putting something on site, and then hoping the viewers can look to the right directions and find out the interesting features on the islands. So instead of imposing a new narrative on the island, they are pointing to things that are already existing. And because this is a research-led project, and we are not imposing our knowledge about this place. Rather, we are acknowledging the local knowledges. So that we have done a lot of interviews, field works, learning from the local residents, Islander, instead of we creating a different set of narrative about the island. And from the slide, you can also see, of course, because it's an in situ public art projects. So all of the works are set at different locations in the southern part of Lamma Island. So some are set on the beach, some are set along the main street in the Western sense, and we emphasize relationality that is hoping to create new social relationship, not just between the artists and the residents, but also giving a chance for people to have encounter with other Islander. So that's basically the things you will find, the special characteristic of this 15 set of artworks.
Yeah, you mentioned that the curatorial project took place primarily in the southern part of Lamma Island. Can you give us a sense of the geography of the island very quickly?
Lamma Island actually is big, just because in the following we have a pre-recorded sections. I will introduce the size of the islands set against the background of Hong Kong as a coastal place. So we have 7,000 residents, but mostly settled in the northern part. So the southern part is somehow have been attracting less in attention because of the smaller populations, because of the predominantly natural landscape.
Okay, I see. Right. So Leung Po just mentioned that she has recorded the lecture because during the typhoon season, she expect that the internet connection may not be very smooth. So she did that this afternoon. So before we turn to the pre-recorded videos, I want to ask her a question that this curatorial project has been presented by LCSC and its official art body, the Art Promotion Office, as a public art project. So I'm very interested in learning from you how this public art project taken place in a less urbanized area. And we often call this kind of area an outlying island in Hong Kong. How can this kind of curatorial project produce new knowledge that can be applied in other fields? So Leung Po mentioned an island studies perspective earlier. And for those of you who are less informed, island studies is a rising interdisciplinary research that has become increasingly popular among scholars for the study of islands, archipelagos, and also the waters that surround and connect them over I think about 1 to 2 decades. So so maybe we can play the recorded lecture now so that we can have a sense of how an art curatorial project produce knowledge related to island studies.
So thanks, Kathy, for the introduction and the Department of Chinese Culture for inviting me. It is really my great honor to be in this series alongside with all the other world-renowned scholars. As said, I have many hats. The hat most relevant to tonight's talk is I myself as a long-time resident on Lamma Island. Tonight, though we cannot have a human touch in a physical setting, but during the talk we can see each other face to face in the virtual space. So about Lamma Mia and the entire project actually began with a very pure personal and humane reason. And the process is all about a labor of love. So please bear with me for a few sentimental moments. So on your right, I think it's on your right, yes, is my landlady. And she was born before the Japanese occupation and spent almost her entire life on the island. And she taught me so much about the necessary local knowledge in order to survive in the coastal community, including identifying eatable plants, herbs, agricultural techniques around the 24 solar terms, as well as livelihood made from the sea. So given it is a very small village and there is an embarrassing intimacy in the community, she even advised me to pick the right man after my husband, at that time, my boyfriend, visit. And then on your left is a daily ferry trip early in the morning. You will see there gentlemen sitting there, and we are unfortunate to capture the story of the old lady here because when we because before we start to do research, she passed away, but we are fortunate enough to record the story of this old uncle. He spent he served as a seaman and feed his family on the island, remaining on the island by his remittance. Thus, no matter how the wave hit our ferry, he remained calm and fearless. But however, not long after we record his history, he has also passed away. Therefore, the aims of this project is to compete with time. So temporality has been a significant element in the entire research journey, not just because of the water, the time make the community different from continental village, but because of the recurrent life patterns of Icelanders and changes that is often omitted from the general narrative about the new territories or the real area in Hong Kong. So apart from all these sentiments and love to a place and a people, of course, the research also began with an academic scrutiny. So this is, here you can see this is a signboard erected at our village in 2017. If you read closer, you will see the narrative there echoes with the myth about Hong Kong. So it all began with a fishing village or so-called a barren island, then developed into a metropolis. And you will see the graffiti there, and I declare I'm not the one who make it, but it shows there are discontents in the community about such kind of developmental narrative. That is saying the village is depopulated, is so poor, there's nothing worth to preserve there. Then there is that means it's a place waiting for redevelopment. And apart from that, let us stand back a bit and look at the problem from a wider perspective. This is another village in Taipo, Dabu, and I lived in the village for 5 years. And the house I used to live is just right behind this beautifully built ancestral hall. And this continental, I would say continental rural area is very different from the island's rural area. And during the 5 years, I have witnessed its transformation from a communal space in daily use for the villagers, then turn into a declared monument. And the problem is, after it has been declared as a monument, the communal festival no longer take place there. So the preservations there is the preservation of the tangible objects, but not the living history. And from this example, I think we can examine two typical fallacies sometimes found in the studies of the rural area in Hong Kong. First, there exists a spatialization of time. I find it really interesting, that is rendering the rural area as the modernized urban other. And by traveling maybe just 2 stations further north, one may find the authentic traditional way of life like a travel back in time. So that's why there is questions about this kind of approach in studying the rural area. It has a spatialization of time. Then secondly, studies on the new territories and preservation project often, as I just said, historicize and objectivize. I won't use the word mummify, but it's mostly is to fixate the objects or the tangible part of the heritage at a certain period of time, and taking away the trace of the living history. So and it is done unconsciously a lot of time, but sometimes it is deliberately for the needs of cultural tourism. So often we see there are narrative about villages that centering around a specific clan and their tangible heritage, typically water village, ancestral hall, the school, or the pagoda if they are rich enough to have built one. The problem of this is history of other ethnic groups or new incomers occupying the Western style small houses granted by the traditional rights policy are not recorded or being considered as part of the authentic village narrative. And this kind of representation serves as a loop to reinforce the exclusivity of identity, privileging the indigenous rooted on the land. I will keep on emphasizing this because this talk try to introduce an island studies perspective. So it's privileging the indigenous rooted on the land, while marginalizing other forms of belongings, either newcomers or other ethnic groups that are not grounded on the land, and even to some extent, even their own living culture. To the contrary, the old folks here in my village, they will keep on saying, oh, we are very poor, this is a barren island, and nothing here, so far away that even the birds don't want to fly here. So they still, even today, they still have this kind of resentment about living on an island far away. But I think does it really mean there's nothing meaningful to be recorded, preserved, or valued? Right. So here you say maybe in the village we just have a group of rocks that mark the boundary of the village and serve as a local god of the earth. And then we don't have pagodas, we don't have beautiful ancestral hall, and we don't have school. But stone built and the stone are locally mined. And stone built typical, very humble village houses in different style from different periods. So there's no authenticity here, you can say. Then the third problematic that is related to the two above is leisurization of space. This is particularly obvious for islands comparing with other destinations in the continental new territories. And such kind of narrative often forgets the islands and its extensive coastline is also a place for livelihood. So typically you will see from the popular press, or is telling you where you can find secret beaches, where you can find fishbowl in authentic taste, and then where you will find the right angles to see the sunset, that kind of typical narrative. And then all this coastline used to be productive space have been turned into leisure space. And let us step back a bit again and look at aims and problematics of the research. There are some facts about Lamma Island. Hong Kong actually has more than 200 outlying islands. Though the term outlying could be misleading, because Lamma Island is among one of them, and it's just about 4 kilometers away from the main island, that is the Hong Kong. If we take a different perspective from the sea, it is actually a neighboring island. So it has almost 40 square kilometer land area and 7,000 populations, while most of the population are concentrated in the northern part, Yongsu Wan, with a ferry link to Central. And when I conduct a guided tour, a physical guided tour, I always ask my participants, okay, taking Lamma Island, Changzhou, you can see it from the map, Lamma Island, Changzhou, and Chengyi for comparison. Can you tell me which is the biggest in its original size? So often the answer would be Chengyi, which is not true. The reason giving us the wrong impression is just because Chengyi, which is measuring 10 square kilometers, is highly urbanized. Or we could say it is a de-islanded island because of its fixed link traffic system that bridging the CDB to the airport. So it's an infrastructure island, and it's highly urbanized or even industrialized. And then it gives us a false impression it is a very big island. Because of its size, I mean the size of Lamma Island, and this geographical diversity, Lamma Island is divided, always lure us to perceive them as a unified place. So because it's surrounded by water, and if you look into the map from the top view as if it is a unit, so it's often always lure us to perceive the island as a unified place by this kind of visualization. So thus people tend to have a wrong impression that Lamma Island is all about Yongxuan in the north, this area. And reducing its internal diversity. So as a long-term resident on the south, and the need to challenge this stereotype, I chose the south as the site for our investigation. So it's basically, we make a line here, and there are different coastal community along the south. And my research first began, my research journey depart from the small dot here. You see Motat one here. And it's the single village that I have been living for more than 20 years. Then I expand the project into a research-led curatorial project titled Lamma Mia that include all the coastal settlements in the southern sections, with a special focus on its multifunctional main street that is here in Sokuan. And this main street is the administrative and infrastructural node, religious center, since there is a Tinhang temple, as well as a dual-mode fishing village in the anthropologist Barbara Watt's terms, that built upon the historical relationship between the land residents and the fishermen's community. So when we conduct interviews or chit chat with the old folks there, they keep reminding us, okay, you cannot omit the water people, and whenever you say something about our community, you have to say 水陸居民. So both terms, the residents on the land and the residents on the sea, have to be acknowledged. So here comes the two projects. So I depart from Motat one, and then the research-led project presented by the Leisure and Cultural Services Department. So finding my way via the smaller project, I start to realize the need to introduce an island studies perspective into the bigger picture. So what do I mean by island perspective here? So it is mainly informed by two claims made by Juhiro Sua, one of the founding scholar on island studies. So in his essay, The Space of Shima, he called for the attention to two things. First is island subjectivity. Second is cultural landscape. So quote, he said, Shima, that is island, can be considered as a subjectivity in which islands are modeled into cultural landscape. So they're interrelated. Through interactions between people, the memories of those who are part of island and the social system involved. So such subjectivity will produce a common sense. Shared other later article by Badachio, he further the questions into epistemology by asking how to study islands on their own terms, or how to produce narratives that are by, for, or with the Islander, but not about them. So just imagine it's all about them. It's not with, it's not by, it's not for the Islander. Then secondly, he Sua called us to pay attention to cultural landscape. So territory is thereby strongly associated with the livelihood of communal social space, and a particular type of territorial imagination for its boundary consists of landmarks and waters, coastline, and hill marks mark the island. That's why in Chinese saying we always call islands san instead of using the term dou. The territories are emergent and created as a place where the occupants or residents conduct everyday activities. I think this is very obvious that I'm trying to tackle the problems of leisureization of space here. That's why we took a method that is focusing on the livelihood of the place. So and it is not just about the built structure, but how Iceland makes sense of the place, thus to make a living from it. Just like you will see here is the seaweed harvesting seasons. So Icelanders, by their experience and repeating performance, then they will know when and how to collect the seaweeds with specific tools that is all by DIY. So these 2 points are interrelated. I mean, Iceland's subjectivity and cultural landscape, in the first sense. Okay, let's have some pictures. And by adopting landscape in our methodology, that means we reject the approach to study a place by isolating its features and paid attention to the significance of insignificant places that form the Islander daily routine instead of a baseline, typical baseline research that ABCD dot. There is a temple, there is a dam, there is a water breaker, or blah blah blah. So these places these places form the Islander daily routines. And in this illustration created by our almighty researcher, she is very talented, not just an ethnographer with good memories, but also an artist by herself. Teresa trying to indicate the centrality of water in the island's life. So the daily routines are evolved along the bay. And then there are a lot of interactions between the land and the sea. So is it not just a touristic landscape for exploration, but a space for fishing, farming, as well as goods exchange? I have a very interesting anecdote here when we interview one of the village chefs from the southern sections. He said in the old days, they exchanged starch for protein with the fishermen because there was no monetary economy back in time. And then it shows the mutual interdependency within the community that is multi-ethnic, that is cross social class, and that form a common sense on the island. So here I I have another photo about relationality. I mean, there are multiple spatiality and realities that coexist in a small place on the island. They are coexisting and relating to each other. The picture here shows the main street, if we take a Western sense, main street of Sokuwan, named by the planner as the first street. However, historically, the community didn't start from here because this is a piece of reclaimed land built relatively lately in the 1970s, and the historical main street that we have seen in the previous slides. So that was the original coastline, and then this historical main street is then rendered as the third street because it's being pushed behind by the planner. So I think there is a similar case in the Western District when we had the first street, second street, first street along the slope. And then the naming of this street is actually from a water perspective, or we could say in the Hong Kong Island's case is from the colonizer perspective because they reached the island by the sea. So it's not the chronological historical order of the community historical development. And this two different perspectives marking the earlier settlers and the late comers are coexisting along the water. So the painting is a bit blurred, but I hope you can grab the idea here. So water is a crucial element in Iceland life, and there are plenty of landmarks in significant places that mark the trace of former livelihood along the long interface between the land and the sea. So here we can see two paintings by Sum Gun-yi, resulted from a field trip led by a local informate, Kang Go, who took us along the southern coast. And you will see here the two places, one named Saigon Set, Sun-Dry Stone, and then the other Tien Hao, so is the opening of the paddy fields. So there is a interface between the land farming and other food harvesting activities along the coast. And in Lamma Mia, we commissioned 2 documentaries. So Kathy, maybe you can start to prepare the link. So one by Chuck Chow on Tien Hao, the goddess of the sea, and then the other one by Ma Jihang about the Chinky Ferry. So both themes took an observational approach to record the changing cultural landscape and how objects mediate the Iceland life. And we spent much time in researching the history of the family business because it's run by a family named Wu for 4 to 5 generations now, because they started business in the 1950s. That emphasized the ferry as a space for everyday life that is floating but constantly making a trajectory by repetition. So it's a repeating route, although you can find no trace on the sea surface. And the setting in the short clips, you can see the setting of the ferry is mainly for the purpose of traffic of people and goods instead of tourists. It is a pivotal place for social encounter, transforming strangers into Icelanders and neighbors. So please help to share the short clips here and turn up the volume loud, please.
鐘先咁闊佬。哎呀，阿成哥嗰啲 friend 係放呢啲㗎嘛。邊張靚仔相先？
Yep. So I hope you will be able to grab an idea of the observational documentary. It's all about daily routines. People are no longer strangers because they meet each other on the ferry every day, and then there are traffic of goods, traffic of people instead of just a scenic experience for tourists. So let me share my screen again. Okay. And ferry is a good case to explain relationality of the islands. As said before, the island is not a unified place because we have a different variety of the coastline, and the geographical specificity will enable or disable different kind of activities for the livelihood. So no one from the south would hike for 2 hours in order to get a ferry to Central, right? Because it's a big island. So instead of traveling to Central, people in the southern section will travel to Aberdeen. And that's form a 1 hour, so-called 1 hour daily routine circle, daily living circle. But on the other hand, this route is also historical because it is important link for good exchange between the fishing village in Sokuwan and the fishing town in Aberdeen. So the ferry is a space for social reproductions, a communal meeting place across generations, race, and social class. You see, this is a typical journey that you will have kids running around. Adults will melt, will break the ice because there is a dog there, and then they will all playing, talking, chit-chatting on the ferry. So relationality naturally bring us to another topic, that is a set of paradox about Ireland. Because Iceland often being regarded as an insurer's place, an isolating place. That's why we keep on saying outlying islands. But if we look at it from another perspective, that is from the oceans, from the maritime, then maybe we could find this is actually a place for unlimited encounter and connectivity instead of insurality. So here we see from a terrestrial point of view, a lot of city dwellers, Aberdeen is the end of Hong Kong, marked by the MTR line, right? But however, if we just turn the map upside down, it's actually the departure point to the 20-something islands in Hong Kong, as well as the fishing zones in the South China coast, right? And such a perspective reflect our limitations in navigation skills and knowledge. So without this open shore, we will forget Hong Kong is composed of islands. So it's a place for archipelago, or in Sua terms, archipelago. So it's a lot of islands, and then the sea is full of meanings, full of practice, instead of just an open, empty space. So I love this view. This is the scene of our daily travel, that you will have a spectacular view of our beautiful and even sacred, I would say, Lantau Island. Okay, so also related to cultural landscape is who is occupying the landscape, who is making meanings of the landscape. So here it comes island subjectivity. And I would say inhabitants are reproduced by landscape. As Sua say, shimmer subjectivities is crucial for imaginative regeneration. So that include all kinds of performative activities, especially like here, the Tin Hau Festival is an annual rituals and ceremony, and by performing the rituals, relationship between the islands and its people. So these are all the fishermen used to anchor the boat in this Lok Zhao, this bay area. But then they will keep coming back, returning to the place annually. So it forms or renew the relationship between the people and the place and among the people as well. So that forms a loop somehow where memories of historical continuity is reenacted. It has to be reenacted, otherwise it will be diminished. And enabling the returning islander to reconstruct the landscape. So every year they will swath the ground, helping Tin Hau to put on new clothes, and then have a lot of muscle men to do the dragon dance to renew the relationship. So here, maybe we can play another 1-minute clips by Chuck Chang, 風調雨順, I wish. So this is the main street, the first street of Hokmore. Okay, thank you, Kathy. Let me share again. Yes, here we are. I love to show that particular clip because it illustrates the renewal of relationship between a place and the people in a negative way, because in the short clips they're the younger generations of the fishermen. They no longer want to keep the Tin Hau statues in their own home, and then they went there and asked the Tin Hau if they can send their own statues to the temple. And then by dropping that, we call the sing boy. It's not actually joystick, but something similar. The Tin Hao insists that you have to keep our relationship. So it's really interesting because religion is not just about religion or spirituality, but it's about the livelihood and the trade networks that you see their disjuncture through time. Okay, so next. So I as I just said, the landscape will reproduce people, right? So here is a photo that when we conduct oral history interviews, one of our informates took our old photo of the front yard and then comparing with the state of beings right now, and then she has the visions to going to return to the countryside and then to start farming again. For subjectivity, I will like to push it a bit further by throwing questions here. Because all things and creatures on island must have been coming from somewhere else. So even the indigenous people claiming the longest route, they also came from another landmass. And they, in the lifetime, they may have been taken the longest sojourns afar in the lifetime, just at what I first shown in the first slide. That is the old uncle. He used to spend half his life on the cargo ship, going afar, and then sending remittance, keeping a relationship with the Standard Island. Therefore, islands may not be best described as an identity, but would be best captured as a highly fluid state of beings, right? Because it's come and go, but then you keep you keeping a relationship with the place. And this state of being is built upon a set of common knowledge or common sense learned by doing. So it's not prescribed that you follow the instructions, but from experience, from lived experience, and also being remembered in your body. So it's a set of tactile knowledge, embodied memory. So as an Icelander like me, sometimes I don't need to look at the clock in order to know the time, because our ear keep open, and then you will hear the noise of the engines of the boat. Then you will know, oh, this is that ferry, and then it's about time to start to cook your meal, or to pick up the kids, or doing other daily routines. And by being on the boat for so many years, not just me, but a lot of Icelanders will wake up naturally when the ferry has come close to the home, when you're traveling on the boat. And as shown here, the old ladies, so they will know when to fish or plant a certain species at a right time. So it's all learned by doing, and it's that kind of practices or experience build your state of beings. So it's not just an identity per se. So in the book, we highlight the non-dualistic, non-essential identities in the community. So we divided the oral history interview into 4 parts. So there are villages, there are the people rooted on the land. There are the water community, the people throwing on the boat. And we try to make it non-dualistic by introducing another category, that is the Bay people. So this is Sokuwan. So there are several settlements along the coast. And then in our interview, they will say we are Bunwanyan. we are people belongs to our bay. So they don't fit into the dual mode of the fishing village, that is either you are the land people or the sea people, but somehow they share they build a new collective identity that is linked by the openness of the water, formed gradually because they are newcomers after the Second World War. And then we have interviews with all walks of life. Like this is a shopkeeper. Her parents used to run a community store. And then we have this very dedicated member of the Real Committee, uncle. His profession, his trade is doing construction works. And then a younger generation who is also helping the uncles, but at the same time found for rowing the dragon boats. Okay, so lastly, this is a beautifully produced book, and I think the department have already sent you a link to download the whole book. There's still much to say about the project and my island, but due to limited time, I have a few closing remarks before I end these sections. So it is a project for Lamma Island, but not. I hope my dear hope is not limited to Lamma Island, but by learning from the unique experience of the island, I hope we can review our spatial perception of Hong Kong by challenging the dominating terrestrial worldview that is land-based, that is looking at the world, at the sea, marine territory from a continental perspective. Secondly, I have to emphasize I'm just a beginner and claim no expert in the field. My dear hope is to prompt more research and gather more like-minded people to expand the field, if not a discipline. And most importantly, the book and the project is a result of the collective efforts of the Art Promotion Office, Art Together, and my wonderful research team that I learned a lot from, especially Dr. Wang Weiling, our research assistant, Teresa Chan, my neighbor, so it's an insider research, Eric Koch, and our almighty editor, Priscilla Chen. So all merit should go to all of them. And another sentimental moment is this research was conducted in a very difficult time for 2 to 3 years. So for many Hong Kong people, it seems ever more difficult to love a place. But yet without Lamma Island, I'm sure I would never love Hong Kong as much. And as said, water is borderless and resilience. So I hope audience tonight, especially those from Hong Kong, can keep up hope. And there's much to do. And just please remember, be water. So learn from the water. Thanks for listening, and I hope we will have interesting, inspiring discussions.
Thank you so much, Leung Po, for your very inspiring, very rich talk. You know, there are so many things we can unpack here. So in the meantime, let me clarify it a little bit. So first, Leung Po and I will have a casual conversation. For those of you who have any question, you can either type your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and turn on your camera and also microphone to speak to the speaker directly. All right? Okay. So Leung Po, well, this project is very interesting. You began by mentioning that there were different kind of myths surrounding Lamma Island, because you said that the common knowledge about the Lamma Island is that it is a very unified place, right? But such a perspective to the island has actually reduced its diversity. So I wonder if you can clarify the idea of unification or maybe homogeneity a little bit, especially you are a person who grew up in the city, I believe, and then you moved to the island 20 years ago. So what are some of the stereotypes or misconceptions surrounding Lamma Island specifically?
I think the audience will have their own impression about Lamma Island as well. So comparing with other islands like Changzhou, Daiyushan, there is a stereotype that all Lamma Island will smoke sweet, and there are lots of guailou, and there are lots of exotic cafe, small businesses that dominating the typical narrative about Lamma Island. But and then there is another interesting anecdote that sometimes when friends want to visit me, and then they will give me a call. Oh, I'm on Lamma Island now, and then I will ask, oh, where are you now? Then they will say, oh, I'm in Yongshuwan, and then I will tell them, okay, let's meet tomorrow then. So size does matter, the mixed population does matter, but the predominant narrative about Lamma Islands is made of the situation in the northern part. And in the southern part is a totally different scenario, because there's much less population, and then there are existing fish farmings in the Bay Area, and there's still production activities instead of a place that relies on importing products. So there's still a micro productive system in the southern part of Lamma.
Okay, so it seems that for most of the people living in Hong Kong, they are more familiar with the northern part of Hong Kong Island, because that's how they got to the island from Central, right? By ferry. Right. So for people who want to go to Sok Kwu Wan, they need to take the ferry from Aberdeen, isn't it? So which is not the ordinary route taken by the people.
Yeah, that's why by studying Lamma Island, like in the recorded sections, I keep on emphasizing relationality. That is because if we just look at the island by the physical facts, it doesn't really tell the spatiality of the place. Because for those living in the northern part of Lamma Island, they have a ferry link to Central. But then we have the ferry link to Aberdeen, which is a much more local place instead of the CBD of Hong Kong. And then there are arguments in island studies that there are a set of relationships that we always overlook about islands, because just by the urban planning, they are predetermined relationship, and it's a dominating one, that is the islands have to be dependent on the mainland or the continent. That's why the ferry link is always two-directional between the island and the city center. But then we are forgetting the inter-islands relationship that has the open possibilities for multi-directional connectivities. For example, it's very difficult for me to have a hike in Lantau Island since I moved here, because whenever I want to travel to Lantau Island, I have to go to Central. No, I have to go to Aberdeen, Aberdeen to Central, Central then take the ferry to Lantau Island. Although when I am traveling on my sea journey, Lantau Island is just on my left-hand side. So I understood this is very interesting, and Lamma Island is just a case for us to review our terrestrial framework in understanding Hong Kong and other places.
Yeah, I think the spatiality that you have just mentioned is very interesting. So given the fact that you have been living on the island for such a long time and you realize the stereotype and misunderstanding surrounding the island. So when you first conceived of this curatorial project, what were some of the immediate questions or problems that came to your mind, that whether those problems shape the way you recruit your collaborators or artists to work with? Yeah, so the question
As
about
before, this is, I think this, I take it like in a personal way first, because I'm very afraid of tourists. Okay, and my fellow Icelanders somehow share the same emotion, because the tourists always sometimes they will congest our ferry so that we cannot get on board and go to work or to other activities. But then there are also a lot of misunderstanding when they walk by. So typically they will pointing to a papaya and then say this is a pineapple tree, or pointing to a bitter melon and say this is a hairy melon, something like that. So the very humble primal aims of the project is to demystify the island as a generic place, and specifically for Lamma Island, they're not just only Guilou, the expat on the island, but they are other incomers of all different ethnicity, and there are people living 9-to-5 life instead of just bohemia, they're smoking weed every day. So it's to the primal aim is to demystify the stereotype of Lamma Island. But also, as said, because we have observed that there is a phenomenon that is leisurizing the islands. I think this is particularly serious than comparing to like the place I lived before in Tai Po, because the village somehow is kind of exclusive place. The islands always being found as a welcoming place for tourists or leisure activities. But this kind of dominating narrative somehow affects the urban planning as well. That that you see there are a lot of projects that is strengthen the coastline by building high-rise promenade that is not that is a disadvantage for really productive activities. So the project have the dear hope to somehow tell a different scenario from this popular imaginations and narrative.
Okay, then I want to zoom into one specific thing, the technique of telling, right? Seems to me that this curatorial project has gathered together a lot of experts. Some of them are researchers or ethnographers or artists who have ethnographic experience or other approach of making art. So it's very interesting that with such a large team of collaborators, right? They use their the tools that they are very familiar with to give voices to people who are living on the island, right? Very often their voice are not being heard. So I've been thinking whether to what extent you think this kind of curatorial project may produce a specific aesthetics, if I can think about it this way, because the voice is being given to the water people, the land people who are living on the island. So whether you are able to notice some sort of interesting aesthetics being explored by the artists in this project.
And so I tried to highlight indexicality before, because the methodology of the project is to study the cultural landscape. So instead of like, for example, typically the iconic work of the island themes will be boat, tortoise, fishes, that kind of symbols. But instead of taking a symbolic approach or an iconic approach, some of the artists take an indexical approach. That means they are pointing to things that are invisible, but predominant elements that form the Iceland life. For example, air and wind, or even water. So there are projects like the one by Ho Yunleung. So he reminds us there are plenty supply of water on the island, and that used to be a very important resource for paddy fields, but nowadays are being overlooked and just treat them like sewage and others, and just let them flow into the sea. And then there are another project that is by Jazz and Jazz and I suddenly forget the name. By Jazz and another illustrator, Gin Choi. So they erect flags that in a style that's similar to the flags we use for the Tin Hau Festival, but then they join us to join our field works and interview the fishermen, and then they capture the terminologies of the group, and then put the vocabulary on the flags, and then they deliberately, by intention, they chose semi-transparent materials. So instead of to dominate the landscape, they are somehow indicating the insignificant places, but they have been playing a role in the daily routines of the Icelander.
Okay, so it seems that one take we get from this project is to pay more attention to insignificant or previously overlooked or marginalized object space, space of mobility, space, transitional space like ferry, etc., and also previously overlooked material like water, right, being treated as sewage. All right. Okay, so now may I invite my colleague, Dr. Pan to join us.
And then I want to add one more point on this.
Okay.
I think social relationship is also very important in the project. So instead of we are bringing our set of knowledge to the island, we are trying to acknowledge the existing local knowledges in the process. So it's not just the end product that we extract some findings from the place, but we are working with the community and then learn from them, and then just turn it into a more artistic way to explain their lived experience. So it has this kind of spirit and mentality in the project. And also there is another very interesting anecdote. If our audience flip through the book, you will repeatedly see an old uncle. And he, before the project, I never really talked to him because he's an old uncle. And then on the ferry, you will see their gender divisions. So uncles go with the uncles, aunties go with the aunties. So I never really talked to him. But then later we find out he is a chef. So his daily job is to cook seafood, but then he is also a self-taught artist. So he combined the skills of Chinese paintings and calligraphy. And then since then, we invite him to a lot of occasions to writing the red banner for the Icelander, and also paint a mural in the community. Since then, he gained a new identity and respect in the community. So instead of just an anonymous old uncle in the community, people start to address him as Lam Lao Si in a more respectful way. And then me and him start to have a more dynamic conversation as well. So the spirit is to give a chance for people to encounter and exchange, and through the process, you somehow are being changed and transformed as well.
Okay, this is a very valuable idea. The idea that a community art project can be a space for showing a social relation, or a space for people to reconstruct their previously unheard, unknown social relationship. So because of time constraint, let us open it up. So I can see that there's a question coming from the audience, and I believe that my colleague, Pan Lu, will also have some interesting question for you. So she may join us at any time she wants. We give her special, a privilege. So maybe we can read the first question first. Okay, so it's by Li Yujie, scholar from Lingnan University, specializing in art and curatorial project as well. So thanks, Lambo, for the wonderful talk. The book Mota Then and Now is really well written, highly recommended for those who haven't read it yet. My question might be a bit general. I'm interested in how island studies or the knowledge production in the formation of this project can help us rethink about new approaches to contemporary art historiography or history of Hong Kong art. Okay.
Thanks for the questions. So I will start counting. So I'm a bit. I start to worry now. I hope the internet will stay. Quickly. I keep on telling the team the research part is not for setting the content. It's not just a background, I would say. So some of the artists, they put much time to join our research and join our fieldworks and interviews. So they are working along with the researcher and also participate into the daily life, daily routines of the Icelander. So it's not just the background that you separate from the artwork. So they are somehow encouraging the spirit that you are integrating into the place. So I'm very satisfied that most of the work are indexical instead of taking the face values or the empty signifiers, the fish, the yak, the something like that. They are really in depth and immersed into the surroundings. I because as a insider researcher, it's an insider research. I'm fortunate to have accumulated 20 years of experience living on the island. So I will try to tell multiple realities in the place. So actually, cultural landscape should be in the plural forms, because although it's the same space, there could be multiple meanings. There could be a place for different encounters. Even as small as a boat, you will see uncles go with uncles, aunties go with aunties. So they already provide two perspectives of the same place. So I think the point is to point to the multiplicity. There is no just one dominating narrative or perspective, but providing open up space like the water that allowed different interpretations and participations.
Okay. So any question from the audience, or Dr. Pan Lu, would you like to join us?
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, this also, and also your description about it's difficult for you to go from Lamma to Lantau also reminds me of this, you know, infrastructural bias that either the internet or the ferry lines are not really, you know, covers the interlinks between islands. Marginalizing them in terms of the infrastructure, right? So, I mean, it's really, can you hear me? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is really an interesting and I think very important methodology of island studies for Hong Kong today, for Hong Kong history as well. I think because island has long become the other of Hong Kong City in various grand narratives, as you said, in the narrative of developmentalism and capitalism, in colonialism. As we know, you know, the birth of Hong Kong seems to the beginning of the Hong Kong is the story of Hong Kong getting rid of its identity as being a fishing village. You know, we always started the story of Hong Kong saying that. So de-islanding, or you know, you know, fishing village is the key to the success of Hong Kong. So I think this is really important that we come back and to realize that Hong Kong is still an island. And it's not only the outlying islands or islands. Hong Kong is also an island. Yeah. So this subjectivity, to retrieve the subjectivity of Ireland is so important. So I really appreciate your efforts and all the hard works you have been doing. So I have two questions, maybe very quickly. I hope hopefully I can you know, make myself clear. So the first question is because we have this, you know, dichotomy between island and the city, let's say in Hong Kong. So I think the importance of your project lies in breaking down this dichotomy. So, but how can we do this by not only, you know, emphasizing on the uniqueness of the island and also this preservation, continuous preservation of island features, because that will intensify its otherness to some extent, right? So how do you think along all these years of art projects and community-based projects, you think it's possible to really break down this dichotomy? This is the first question. And the second question is because we had this conversation about this artificial island in Hainan, right, the other day. And so in Hong Kong, we also have a lot of this reclaiming, you know, land, reclaimed land project that seems to be also erasing island, or, you know, the distance between even Kowloon and Hong Kong by Star Ferry is becoming, the journey is becoming shorter and shorter because of the reclaiming project. So I'm wondering if you touched upon any of this kind of, you know, de-islanding process in your research related to no matter Lamma or, you know, Hong Kong islands. There are 200 projects. So that's also my question. So this you know, artificiality, this new infrastructural project that try to further erase island, not only mentally but also physically. So that's my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. As I said, I claim no expert in island studies, but I have observed there is a trend that instead of taking Iceland as the scope and the field, what do we mean by the Iceland's perspective is the centrality of water, instead of, you know, the piece of land being surrounded by water. So if we, and what Iceland can teach us is to open up our framework in understanding space. That is not by just limit ourselves and looking from the terrestrial point of view to understanding space, but instead to place water in a central place and open up our perspective in understanding the relationship between different locations. So like in Hong Kong Island, we actually is also surrounded by waters. And then it's very difficult to this because our urban planning, our own kind of urban planning tends to exclude water. So you either stop them from flowing into your property, you put it under the rock. That is, you build beaches, and then you dig deep down into the ground, and then let the water flow underneath. So this kind of approach is actually taking water as other. But in fact, especially in the era right now, we have climate change crisis. Water is something that you cannot avoid, just like today, yeah, right? And then that's why I think moving from just studying the island and limit our scope, that is the island. Island's perspective can help us to open up our framework, that is to look at place in the fluid, resilient water perspective. And one of the photo I love in the book is this one, and then it's a famous quote, and I think all the people interested in island study will quote it. I really like this picture. And then the quote here is from LP, however, a very famous quote that is, usually we will describe the islands as an outlying island. So it's an island in the far sea. But if we are traveling on the sea and you gain the freedom, you combine the navigating skills, then it is instead a sea of islands. So it's just by putting the map upside down, you open up a new understanding of our spatiality. And I don't have, and I don't think one single project can change a lot of things. And I tend to try to be humble that this is just introducing a different perspective for the communities, especially there to acknowledge the multiple realities or perspective in a small place. That's the small thing I hope I have achieved through the project.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's see if we have any further questions from the audience. All right. Maybe the audience are still thinking about a lot of issues that we have touched upon. I think the idea of relationality is very important.
Yeah.
It's definitely an idea that we can further, develop into something more substantial, either in a curatorial approach or theoretical approach. All right.
Maybe I share my screen that because of the time limit, we are allowed to just show a very short clip of the two documentaries. And if you're interested, there may be some in the future we will have some opportunities to show the two films. So please follow me on IG, and I will put a notice there if we have any screening opportunities.